Welcome back to the NIL Era podcast. My name is Elise and
And I'm Fernando Andrade. We've just hit our 10 episode mark this last week, and we thought it would be a great time to recap on some important lessons that we've learned, especially from our recent guests, while connecting it to real-time events happening in college athletics. Obviously, there's a lot going on, so we'll dive into it. Elise, we know there's a lot going on in this era. There's a big shift going on in the NIL era, hence the birth of this podcast. I think one of the most impactful episodes we've had up to date is with Jim from athletes.org. And he opened the conversation about the possibility of having private equity start to get involved in American sports, as well as the NCAA system as we know it today. So, with that being said, right after we recorded that episode, there was also breaking news on the NFL taking historic steps, to officially allow private equity firms to invest in teams. So, what does this really mean and look like for college athletics, this NFL decision?
for myself, just personally seeing that news, it took a lot of learning and researching what that means and what that looks like in practice. So for the NFL, there was a 31-1 vote to approve private equity investors up to 10% of an individual team's equity. So an approved team can hold stakes in up to 6 teams, approved team as in an approved firm. What's interesting within this deal is there are no governance rights in these teams included. So the firm can't have a board who makes decisions on behalf of the team, etc., that usually private equity firms have a stake in. And like I said, of those approved firms, there's only 8 firms that are actually allowed to participate in investing. And just from a spectator perspective of the NFL, when I saw this kind of historic step, like you mentioned, it's crazy that private equity was never in play before. If you look at all the sports leagues in the world, the NFL is the richest pro sports league. So with the addition of private equity, I'm just interested to see what else can be done in this league. Just kind of anticipating what could happen, I would assume we could see facility investments, but I think the biggest room for improvement is expansion globally. Football is really only played in America, with its kind of variations of maybe rugby and maybe Australian football, but even that is so different. So I think private equity can really just help the expansion of fan bases to new countries, which I'm excited to see where that kind of can grow to in terms of the business side of sports.
That's for the NFL, but what does this look like for college athletics? Like, is it headed in the same direction? You just mentioned obviously football is only played in the United States. Interesting with the Olympics trying to include or about to include a flag football, but that's a separate game. When talking about the football that we know here in America, it was very interesting for me personally that I'm not a huge fan of the game, to see a college football game being played in Ireland.
Mhm.
That was very interesting to me, and I don't think I could have expected this before the NIL era. Do you think it's headed in that same direction, or what type of thing are we looking at with private equity here?
I think it is heading towards that direction, and I think it should. I think that's how you grow these sports, and I'm hoping to see more sports do it. I know that Iowa women's basketball took an international trip a couple years ago. You see programs kind of doing those types of trips. Even your team went to Europe and played a couple games out there, and it's just growing your brand, growing those relationships outside of U.S. soil. And I think for these bigger sports, including that football game, it was a hit. First of all, it was a great game and a great upset, so that was fun to watch in general. But to expand that fan base and to get those diehard fans to go out to Ireland and watch that and have the commentators drinking a Guinness on stream, like that was just fun to see from a fan perspective. And I think college athletics, like Jim mentioned in that episode, we are en route to kind of adopt and become some kind of role in that space, I would say. And I think a basic concept of where we could head towards is the increased commercialization of college sports. And that's with more sponsorships, more merchandising, and in turn, probably the more lucrative NIL deals. But I think a deeper answer of where this could go would be the governance structure and pressure from these private equity firms to perform, whether that be the student athlete, the athletic department, the athletic director. I think that's that governance structure that could change. Unlike what is going to happen in the NFL, usually if you have private equity in play, there's a governance structure of a board that makes those decisions on broader, big picture things. And these private equity firms would look to have a seat at the table and a say in what an athletic department does, potentially in who they recruit and what sports to prioritize and where the money should go, who it should go to. And I think that's a big kind of factor that private equity can play into. And another thing, kind of externally, directly from an athletic department, is conference realignment. Because conference realignment came from a media rights and money driven standpoint, it really proposes the question of why wouldn't private equity do the same? Private equity in this business model could potentially drive even more conference realignment in the future for fans to see bigger head-to-head matchups more frequently and just to overall increase the value of a program, thus your investment, which is all that private equity is.
So essentially, what I'm getting from this, and an angle that I hadn't even considered, is in a way they would be the big brother to athletic directors.
Exactly.
So that's one. But then the latter bit of information that you gave is the Super League, which is something that we definitely talked about with Jim as well. And this has been in talks in European soccer for the longest time now. It's probably been a decade since it was brought up, and FIFA's trying to stop it at all costs. But essentially, it's the same concept of having the best teams just play each other over and over and over again in different countries. And then obviously there's plenty of fans. People would sell out the stadiums. Like it would be watching the best teams in the world just go head to head all the time rather than having to see the best team play a mid-table team or a last place team. Do you think that's what this will be? Like, have the SEC's best teams just play the very best of the other conferences? Because that, realistically, for football, that's what it would look like.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that's the direction we're looking at?
I would see the SEC and Big Ten probably having some sort of alliance. Like, technically, they kind of already do. So it's taking the top teams from both those conferences, possibly a couple from the ACC, Big 12, but it is those top matchups. I could see, like we kind of talked about with Jim, and even like European soccer, the relegation, and you're bringing new teams in, kicking new teams out. So you're staying competitive and you're getting new faces. And that's what keeps the incentive to get better, recruit better, and see it grow that way. I would be interested to see how that would go over with fan bases, because like no one, not saying no one loves the non-conference play of college football, but like I just went to a Northwestern Miami Ohio game and it was the first game of the season. There's that hype, but like you're playing, no dig on Miami Ohio, but like you're not playing a Power 5 school, Power 4 school, that the hype isn't as big. But at the same time, everyone loves those upset wins. Everyone loves to see the underdog. That's why March Madness and the bracket and the tournament, the way it's structured, is so engaging and is so fun, those Cinderella stories. So it's interesting that if, let's say, the Super League was created or private equity gets involved, if those Cinderella stories would be taken away and if fans would really care. Like, that's what I'm interested in, is if they would even care, if they would miss that, or if they're, we want to watch the USC LSU type of games.
The funny thing here is that I think it's a very American thing to always root for the underdog and to see these upsets. It's like part of the American culture. But another part of American culture is the fact that you just keep the leagues very limited and there's no relegation, which to me is just a wild concept because you see it in European soccer all the time. There's plenty of leagues. and the worst 3 teams just get relegated. In the United States, that is not a thing. Not in the NFL, not in the NBA, not in the MLB. Pretty sure not in the NHL. Don't watch it, but I'm pretty sure it works the same way. And more specifically, in the MLS as well, which is the same sport, but it works under these American rules. So I definitely could see the same being true for college football eventually, of just having, you know what, we're limited to 30 teams, 32 teams like in the NFL, and that's it. Because again, that's how it essentially works. But just to close off this first point, I think we're looking at 3 different directions from what I'm getting from you, which is one, having the athletic director big brother, which would probably just be more money, but what's happening right now. That's option 1. Option 2 is have private equity actually act as the owner. So like probably see university and athletic department take a step back in terms of decision making because of obvious reasons. And number 3 is a super league. Is that what we're thinking?
Yeah, I think those are the kind of 3 possible routes. Again, this is kind of all hypothetical, but I think in the landscape of college athletics, you think things are hypotheticals and then they come to fruition. So we'll see.
Just to do this for fun, and I know I'm putting you on the spot, I will put this as the poll of the week for this episode on the Spotify comments. So we'll allow anybody listening right now to click that answer. But for you, what do you think is the most probable option of the direction we're headed in?
I think there's going to be a super league within 10 years for college football. Private equity, give or take 4 years. I think the NFL approving it is a big step.
Alrighty, I think the Super League is for sure a thing that's going to happen. I don't see a way that it would not. The difference is I think it would become a step into the NFL, but on the pro side of sports. I think it would become a bypass of college. You don't go to college, and it's just the second division to the NFL, which to me, again, because of how soccer works in Europe, to me, if that were to happen, the NFL should just create its little I don't know, like grade school league, I guess, and then they graduate into the pros. That'd be interesting. But again, hypotheticals. Comment below if you're on YouTube. Click the poll if you're on Spotify. But that's the first point. We'll go into the second one, which from our episode with Grant House, obviously plenty of news going on with the House settlement against the NCAA for $2.8 billion. We did an episode on that alone. I believe it was episode 3. And then we did an episode with the man himself, Grant House. Great episode. If you haven't checked it out, go check that out. But anyways, we talked with him, and obviously there's a lot going on with revenue sharing and what's coming to college athletics. And we're seeing more and more schools start to prepare for the inevitable and just get creative in trying to produce more streams of revenue. What is this looking like in real time?
I think most notably is the NIL collective space. Like we've talked about before, I think the NCAA thought collectives would go away. They're not. So in this collective space, UConn announced they will be adding its UConn Athletics Collective logo onto the football field for the 2024 season. I think this is an amazing idea to just get more eyes and familiarity to the UConn Collective for fans and visitors who watch their team at their stadium. I think we're going to see more and more schools do this. If not, I think they should in some sort of capacity. Over the last week, we've had the number 1 recruit for men's basketball, Cooper Flagg, who's currently at Duke, sign an NIL deal with New Balance. This isn't really along the same route of creativity as in this like UConn thing, but I think some of the dialogue that's been happening around Cooper Flagg's deal is important to where college athletics could possibly go. And I think the House settlement is a testament to the student athlete voice and what could come about if you are really passionate about a cause and that's a little rant. But so for Cooper Flag signing with New Balance, Duke is a Nike school, so he must wear Nike on the court, at practice, etc. But the conversation and dialogue is people are wondering, when will we get to the point where college players can wear their own shoes no matter what brand the college is signed to? I can see it being a payout by your sponsored company, but I just thought that dialogue was really interesting, and I'm interested to see in the future if that's ever allowed. Um, but kind of moving back to the initial question of what this kind of creativity looks like, we saw Oklahoma State football put QR codes on the back of players' football helmets that linked to their NIL collective. Since that was released, the NCAA has said that this was not allowed because the NCAA saw it as advertising or commercial marks. So that Oklahoma State athletic director came out and said, quoting him, "This serves as the latest example of how college sports are evolving at a faster pace than the rule book." In my opinion, I think the NCAA just found a way for this to be illegal in how you interpret these QR codes, because it's really just fans paying athletes. But again, it's just trying to create this different revenue stream. And really, what is the difference of putting these QR codes around your stadium versus just on the back of the helmets, in which I'm pretty sure Oklahoma State did. They put up those QR codes in other places and removed it from the back of the helmets. So it's doing the same thing, just they had to get a little bit reprimanded of the NCAA saying that's not allowed. So it's interesting to see what these athletic departments are doing, and I'm excited to see what other creative ideas come about of it.
This is such a hilarious phase of whatever matrix we're living in, because in a way, this is literally what streamers do. Like, if you're playing football with a QR code on your helmet and you score a touchdown, you would get those little roses or flowers, whatever those live streams do on Twitch, YouTube, TikTok. Like, have you seen that? How there's like, you can send them some flowers and that's some money. It's literally the same thing. It's the exact same thing. Oh, threw a touchdown. All right, let me pay him. Like, it's so funny how it's all connected in this weird media space of live streaming and football, but it makes a lot of sense. Like, if you really start to think about it, I think it would make a lot of sense. Even in the pros, the only difference is they make so much money. They make a ridiculous amount of money to where people are like, yeah, I don't want to have to pay them more than a ticket. With college, I think it makes sense up until the fact that this is quite literally, in the most obvious of ways, pay for play. And we know collectives are on that side of pay for play. But this is, you're watching me play and then pay me while I am playing. Like, that is the most obvious definition of it. So I know I have very, I guess you could say, old-fashioned, traditional, conservative opinions about NIL, especially in the space of pay for play, because I like to divide the two, as I've mentioned previously. I personally think that should be illegal. Like, I think up until the rules right now, I think it is. But that is an interesting quote. I do think, like, they're not keeping up with the rule book, and I'm totally fine with that if the rule book changes. The issue right now is it just hasn't. But to go back to the other point, as I just mentioned, I do have the traditional old-fashioned point of view, but I have never understood why student athletes can't just wear their own shoes. Like, that's a big thing. Obviously, when you have a lot of eyeballs on you, the brands are going to call you out. But, and I know this is an obvious difference between our sports, but a big thing in soccer is, if your feet are just not comfortable in whatever brand is sponsoring your school, then you just get the brand that is comfortable for you and you black the cleats out and you add some tape over the brand logo, and that's it. Like, that's all you have to do. And people do that all the time. Again, what's the difference? Men's soccer, there's not that many people watching, so it's okay. When it's Duke basketball and you're the number one guy, everybody's looking at you. So that's obviously a big difference. But I'm sure it's the same thing in the NBA, in the NFL, but you look at, again, my references are just European soccer. The two biggest athletes literally on planet Earth, Messi playing for Barcelona, wearing Nike for Barcelona, but his cleats and everything personal is Adidas. And Cristiano Ronaldo, same thing backwards for Madrid. Madrid is all Adidas, so he's wearing his uniform, but the cleats are his cleats, his Nike cleats. I don't understand why they can't do the same thing at the collegiate level. Because all you have to do is then don't send them a pair. Like, it's that simple. Just don't give them away for free if they're already getting their own pair.
So I'm thinking now that you mentioned that, because you're right, like all these NBA players, like Steph Curry's not wearing Nike, he's wearing Under Armour, he's wearing his own shoe. So the way they must do it is sign a contract, apparel contract, not like a shoe contract. That must be how they do it in colleges. It's most likely like in all, like everyone signs the same thing. Of it includes from your field hockey student athletes all the way to your football student athletes. Everyone is head to toe in Nike. That's the only thing I can really think of, minus like we wear Lululemon leggings, but we don't show the tag of it. Like your sweatshirt or whatever covers it. That's really the only thing I can think of. But you're right. Of it, people do wear their own shoe. Like it's not an outlandish thing that no one has ever done, and college student athletes are going to be the first ones to do it. Like that's not the case. So I'm interested to see where that goes, because even Cal in this Under Armour deal, now the Nike deal, the Under Armour deal for us when that launched, probably what, like 5 or 6 years ago now, that was a huge deal for Cal Athletics, for Under Armour to come and provide all this gear plus extra cash, like cold hard cash, in which we remodeled our weight room and had Under Armour branding everywhere. And then it was time to do a new apparel contract, and all the student athletes were like, we want Nike. We want anything but Under Armour, if I'm being honest. And Nike at the time had so many different sponsorships and those contracts already. Like, I don't think Cal was going to be the one that gave them a bunch of revenue. Like Cal, they would be fine without Cal Athletics, and seeing those student athletes with the Nike swoosh. So I think the value of those apparel contracts have gone down a lot more since 5-6 years ago, when I think that was the rise, and those were the big sponsorships of college athletics. So to see that development from 5-6 years ago to now, of it's not the apparel that is like the one media or the one contracts that stand out, whatever. It's all the sponsorships on the field, potentially now sponsorships on the jersey, on the field, things like that. I think is a cool development to see.
Lastly, the collective logo on the field. The thing that's funny to me is it's just a cycle, because you have to, I'm assuming obviously you're paying the school to have your logo on the field. So like what's the difference here? I think maybe the collective is just paying the athletic department instead of the student athletes individually. But it is funny to see how I'm not gonna call it laundering whatsoever, but it's like a weird cycle of just keeping the money, like keeping the money at home in the most legal way possible, right? So very, very funny to see how creative. I think that's the best part, how creative people are getting to find legal ways to put money in athletic departments in the hands of student athletes. It's fascinating, to say the least. To move on to our next point, we obviously had great conversations with both Mark Zeta and Professor Kelly around building your brand. And I think they both gave great points to the importance of brand building and what brands even mean, what they represent. And I think it's very similar to what athletic departments are doing based on their own brand as well, what they have to offer. We saw it with the LA markets and making the USC and UCLA moves to their respective conferences. We've seen it across plenty of the stuff going on in conference realignment, and I believe we're about to see it again with some rumors around UConn joining the Big 12. So what's going on here, and what can you tell me about the UConn brand and why it matters so much to Big 12?
I think this potential move for UConn would be interesting for sure, just because it would force UConn to invest more heavily into football. I think joining a Power Four conference that invests heavily in football more so than basketball, that the Big East Conference is used to, UConn is so far behind in the football realm. I think it would be great for their Olympic sports with just more visibility and competitive teams, let's say in the Big 12. But for even their basketball program, it's for me when I saw those headlines, it's my immediately I thought I was like, is Big 12 a better place or is the ACC a better place? Just looking from a basketball perspective. And then I kind of did some researching, and apparently the Big 12 has been ranked one of the highest, if not the highest, basketball conference in years past. So I can see why UConn is probably considering that this conference realignment to the Big 12 is a great fit there. But again, it's the unforeseen challenges of travel and all the other factors that we have yet to see play out of conference realignment. But I was having a conversation with a good friend of mine around this exact topic, and a point that was brought up was how the Big East is really the only conference that pushed the needle forward in terms of their basketball programs at their institutions. With most Power Four conferences investing heavily in football, the Big East is really the ones trailblazing college basketball in terms of investments and what you see on the court. And the rest of the Power Four conferences are the ones following and playing catch up to even stay somewhat competitive to the Big East. And I think that is something that's really, really interesting. And it proposes the question of revenue share going forward and what that distribution will look like in terms of football and basketball players. In the if the Big East pays their basketball players more of that revenue share than their football student athletes, you're going to have the top recruits most likely going to Big East institutions rather than Power Four institutions, because Power Four, with the house settlement and revenue share, they are paying their football student athletes the majority of this revenue share. I don't really care what other people think. It's gonna happen. Your football players are gonna get that money because they have to. They are the ones making money for your institution. They are the ones who are bringing in that money, and they're probably going to see the most of it. But at a Power Four institution, you also have your men's basketball, your women's basketball players who are revenue making sports. And if you're having, let's say you're at Cal and you're a men's basketball player and you are getting, let's say, what, like 20,000, and someone's trying to recruit you to go to Creighton and they're going to pay you 40,000, that's a very hard thing to say no to when you're just going to be treated so much differently at the Big East versus a Power Four. So I can see possibly UConn not wanting to move in that direction of joining a Power Four, just because they're going to have to invest so much more into football. But again, when you're at that level of a Power Four, I mean, the media rights deals are bigger, but it's not like the Big East media rights is bad by any means. So it'd be interesting to see what the pros and cons would look like for UConn in that perspective, and a lot of different factors, and a lot of which are unknown.
I think there is a massive difference. Obviously, you mentioned some big schools in terms of basketball, but once you look at the amounts of monies of like from those media rights deals, I think it'd be interesting to look at the Big East media rights deal, but I'm assuming Power Four is just so much bigger. I would think so. So it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to see what happens there. And lastly, just to provide some context as we wrap up here, this episode is being recorded after week 1 of college football. This will be out after week 2 of college football, but lucky for us, we're not talking about football predictions in and of itself with the scores. Let's talk about what's going on with some of the issues that came up in week 1 and will continue to come up this season when it comes to some of the media rights deals that literally led to the conference realignment. What's going on here? What type of messes are some schools getting into?
I think the first significant one were the issues with media coverage in terms of both the cable and satellite providers. So even for yourself and people listening, like you were probably affected by that, especially with the Big Ten and the conferences that work with ESPN. We saw for Big Ten with the expansion schools of Comcast, Xfinity, and now with ESPN and DirecTV of not reaching agreements of being able to stream their events in, for the Big Ten's example, for different core territories, and for ESPN and DirecTV not coming to a conclusion of those agreements. So even today at work, we were trying to watch ESPN and it said we have DirecTV, so it doesn't come up. So ESPN, ACC Network, SEC Network, ESPN2, all of those, we couldn't watch anything all day because we had DirecTV. Big Ten, if you have Comcast Xfinity as your cable provider, if you are in the states and territories of Oregon and Washington, you cannot watch your games because the core territories or whatever, they didn't reach an agreement of those expansion territories of Oregon and Washington. So it's kind of a mess, to say the least, and I hope that an agreement comes quickly because on Twitter, you're seeing people get upset. Like, they want to watch their game, so it's putting pressure on these cable and satellite providers, and it's a little funny, the Pac-12 Twitter decided to like kind of clap back and send some memes back to both Big Ten, ACC, SEC. So it's kind of funny to watch. But it's just, it reiterates how important these media rights are and just these agreements of, I'm not saying that there's smaller deals of these agreements, but the little nuances that I don't think people realize. And it's frustrating not being able to see your game on TV. You have to, like, for Big Ten, you had to watch it on like the Fox Sports app or the Big Ten app, things like that. But kind of moving on from there, I think the second observation I had was the media and marketing is everything. And as we introduce new schools into new conferences, you're welcoming in a new set of eyes and potential for fans for your team. I think the most notable media marketing video I saw, not to be a little biased, but USC specifically has their football hype video going viral. I don't know if you've watched it, but it is sick. When you need to invest in your programs to see the reward. This hype video for USC was sick. Like, the way they did it was just great. And now all these eyes are on this USC program, this montage, this hype video. You got to like feel like you were part of USC. You felt like you were a Trojan. The way they crafted it was just amazing. It came up on my TikTok. It was on my Twitter. It was on my Instagram. I had friends send it to me who do not watch football, and they sent it to me. That's the level of awareness that you're able to get when you invest in your programs to see that reward. And then lastly, something I saw was the fan base for college athletics and college football specifically is huge. The week one hype lived up to it. I think even the week zero hype with the game in Ireland lived up to it with Florida State and Georgia Tech. But the USC and LSU game in Las Vegas held at Allegiant Stadium set an attendance record of almost 64,000 fans, surpassing the number of Super Bowl 58. And on ABC, there was an average of 9.2 million viewers with a peak of 11.1 million, making it the most streamed college football game ever on ABC. And I think this will only continue to grow. We're seeing this week the matchup for week 2, the big matchup is Texas at Michigan. That's going to be a huge game. And I think being able to watch college football now from probably a little bit of a different lens, no longer being a student athlete, and to just see how many people love college sports, because again, we've kind of talked about it before. You are a part of that. You are part of that university. You are part of the success that you're seeing on the field. And it's great to see your team do successful. It's great to see those upsets. It's great to see dynasties being rebuilt. And I think that's something that I just got away from week 1 of college football. And again, we're seeing the hype continue with volleyball. Minnesota, it went to 5 sets, women's volleyball. They beat number 1 Texas. That was awesome. Also, shout out Lydia Grote. She went to Cal. She transferred to Minnesota, one of our good friends, and she killed it. But it's great to see the hype of college athletics. People are back on campus, and I'm excited to see where it all goes this season.
I think it's, again, to come full circle with this conversation, seeing the LSU and USC numbers in a location like Vegas, right, which is neutral, ABC's covering it, 2 big schools, very big names, etc., big brands. It's just showing you the power of a potential Super League, right? Like, imagine if those were the consistent numbers. Imagine if, like, that would be unstoppable. In a way, it's almost like you're creating again, I'm going back to European soccer over and over and over again, but it's like the Champions League group stages where you're watching the best of the best play against each other already, and then you get to watch them play in the playoffs as well, which the playoffs will be a whole other topic because I know of the expansion, so we'll talk about that when we get there. But for now, I think seeing it this early on in the season is just showing you the power of, yeah, you can combine 2 schools from different parts of the country and put them in a neutral place, and you will get these numbers. Like, surpassing the Super Bowl is crazy. That's ridiculous. For the very first game of the season is wild. So I think that really is showing you what the future is going to look like with a potential Super League, because it's right there. And if those are the numbers you could get every single week, it's just a business decision to say yes.
And even in the in-person game, like, someone correct me if I'm wrong, but everyone on Twitter were like, inside the stadium, it's 60% LSU fans, 40% USC. These LSU fans will travel. Your USC fans will travel. You have your fan base that will go out of their way to watch their teams play. And I think these LSU fans coming all the way from Baton Rouge to Vegas, like, it's very telling that you have an authentic and loyal fan base.
I mean, definitely. I think for college football specifically, I think it's always been there, but the main difference is probably week 1. Like week 1 in Vegas. I'm sure it's not the very first time it's happened, but having that neutral place to play at is, especially in a city like Vegas, is very interesting, and surely there will be much more to come. But I think that's it. That's it for this episode of this recap of the very first 10 episodes. We'll do it, make this a thing, and episode 21 will be the same thing. But this was good. I think this was a great thing to do, and hopefully we can keep doing them every 10 episodes or so.
Agreed.
To everybody that watched on YouTube or listened on Spotify, thank you guys so much. If you're on YouTube, please like and subscribe. If you're on Spotify, please follow the podcast. That is it for today, and we will see you all next Monday.
Bye.